BC's highest court has officially granted the Haida Nation Aboriginal title to Haida Gwaii in BC.
Following the combustion of several buses, Quebec has halted 1,200 electrical school buses for inspection.
Two Conservative MPs warn that an investigation into Juno news relates to a larger trend of attacking free expression in the Western world. Hello Canada, it's Monday, September 15th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Walid Tamtam.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. The Haida Nation is hailing a, quote, historic victory after British Columbia's highest court affirmed the First Nation holds Aboriginal title to Haida Gwaii. But what does that mean? Aside from leaving private property ownership in doubt, the ruling offers little clarity for private property owners. Council of the Haida Nation in their latest media release said, quote, "Today, Haida ancestors are dancing in celebration." The ancestral dancing celebrated a BC Supreme Court order issued last Friday, confirming Aboriginal title applies to the entire terrestrial portion of the islands. This marks the first time such a declaration has been issued for the full extent of an Indigenous nation's territory. The order is in keeping with the NDP BC government's 2021 Rising Tide Agreement. The Rising Tide Agreement, between the Haida Nation, the British Columbia provincial government, and the Canadian federal government, set out a framework for implementing Haida Aboriginal title across Haida Gwaii. While remaining light on specifics, it commits the parties to, quote, reconcile their respective laws and jurisdictions while affirming that existing fee simple property interests on the islands continue. Notably, while the Rising Tide Agreement attempts to state that existing fee simple interests or private property interests on Haida Gwaii continue to exist under the agreement, that may cease to be the case depending on further litigation surrounding the overlapping of Aboriginal title and fee simple interests. True North reached out to a registered financial advisor and former lender who grew up on Haida Nation territory, then known as the Queen Charlotte Islands, and asked about the potential implications for private property owners. So Walid, what are the criticisms of the Haida Gwaii Aboriginal title agreements?
Well, Isaac, in general, any additional interest on the title of the property, whether an easement or something else, could make the property less attractive to a potential lender. In other words, the BC property market, which is already sensitive to risk given all this Indigenous land title policies going on by the NDP government, the fact is abhorrent uncertainty, and this ruling adds more risk. Now, the worry of risk is echoed by BC Conservative leader John Rustad, who called the process unfolded in secrecy, without consultation with non-Indigenous residents or businesses, leaving thousands of British Columbians unsure about their homes, property, and livelihoods. Another Conservative member, Scott McInnes, went further, warning the decision throws private property rights into the garbage. So the critics I've heard from argue that the title order, while historic, injects a serious amount of uncertainty into private property rights in BC. The financial advisor that True North interviewed said, quote, "Any additional interest on the title of a property, whether that be an easement or something else, makes the property less attractive to a potential lender." He added that the BC property market, quote, "abhors uncertainty," and this ruling adds more of it. The worries by the expert were echoed by BC Conservative leader John Rustad, who says the process, quote, "unfolded in secrecy without consultation with non-Indigenous residents or businesses, leaving, quote, thousands of British Columbians unsure about their homes, property, and livelihoods." Conservative colleague and MLA Scott McInnes went further, warning the decision, quote, "throws private property rights into the garbage, creating provincial-wide uncertainty." The NDP government, led by Premier David Eby, counters that the Rising Tide Agreement explicitly protects fee simple landowners and promises, quote, "certainty for everyone for the long term." But Rustad argues the negotiations were largely behind closed doors and that the ruling, quote, "grants complete sovereignty over private property." He is calling the NDP government to, quote, "immediately appeal the ruling, guarantee that private property rights will be respected and protected across BC, and stop using closed-door deals as a model for reconciliation, and instead consult with all British Columbians on future agreements." Quebec has grounded its entire fleet of 1,200 line electric school buses for inspection after a second bus from the manufacturer burst into flames in Montreal this week. The government announced the move Thursday evening, citing safety concerns after a bus burst into flames in Côte-des-Neiges on Tuesday morning. Several children and the driver escaped unharmed. thankfully. Education Minister Sonia Leben and Transport Minister Jonathan Julien said in a joint statement, quote, "Since the safety of Quebec school children is our top priority, we have taken the preventative decision to ground 1,200 school buses this Friday while transport companies carry out the necessary inspections. No compromises will be made when it comes to safety on school buses." Ministers added that inspections will take place through the weekend. They said alternative transportation will be offered to parents so children can get to school next week. The fire broke out around 8 a.m. Tuesday near Jean Talon Street West and Victoria Avenue. Montreal fire officials said the vehicle was a total loss, though they confirmed the blaze was not linked to the bus battery, according to CP24. The sudden decision caused widespread disruptions for parents and students last Friday. So, Isaac, how often do EV fires happen in general?
Yeah, Walid, as we know, electric vehicle fires are often sensational when they occur, as we see them reported in the news, but data suggests that they might be less common than people think because apparently, compared to gasoline or hybrid vehicles, EVs catch fire at a lower rate. According to a review by Auto Insurance EZ, which compiled data from the National Transportation Safety Board and the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, fully electric vehicles average about 25 fires per 100,000 sold, while this study said that gasoline-powered cars average about 1,500 per 100,000, which seems way too high to me, but that's what their data is. And they said that hybrids top the list with almost 3,500 per 100,000 because hybrids combine both, of course, a combustible fuel system and a high voltage battery pack. Similarly, Verisk, a risk analysis firm, reported that EVs catch fire far less frequently than internal combustion engine cars, again putting the numbers at about 25 per 100,000. But where EVs might stand out, Walid, is the nature of the fires, because when lithium-ion batteries do ignite, they obviously burn at extremely high temperatures that can take hours to put out and sometimes even reignite after appearing to be extinguished. So fire departments across North America have had to develop special protocols for these kind of incidents, and that means that even if EV fires might be more rare, that could be why they generate more headlines because of how serious these fires are. And you mentioned Lion Electric, but just speaking a bit more on them, in January, a school bus in Ontario made by them caught fire, and local firefighters described that as completely engulfed in flames, but luckily all of the students were evacuated, but of course the bus was decimated. And more recently, as you mentioned there, the bus that burst into flames in September led Quebec to ground all 1,200 of their electric school buses for inspection, and Transport Canada has even confirmed that it has investigated multiple fire incidents with Lion buses under the Motor Vehicle Safety Act. So these events have obviously raised questions about maybe whether specific manufacturers like Lion Electric are facing design or maintenance programs, and we know that Quebec invested almost $200 million in subsidies to help electrify its school bus fleet. But then this Lion Electric actually filed for bankruptcy protection earlier this year, and we've seen other electric bus boondoggles across the country. For example, where I live in Edmonton, the buses they bought from Proterra is also now bankrupt, and the batteries don't work. They're in nowhere near what they were advertised as from a range perspective. They have to put blankets on them to heat them up in the winter, and the list goes on and on and on. So we're seeing a lot of issues come from these electric vehicle buses, whether they're extinguished into flames, even when they aren't. They're taken off the road and not operational, which is really unfortunate when it leads to kids not being able to get to school, as we saw in Quebec. Conservative MPs Jamil Javani and Aaron Gunn warned that free expression in Canada is under siege, not only from political violence, but from government institutions themselves. Speaking with True North following a panel discussion, the two argued that Ottawa's criminal investigation into journalist Cian Bexte's reporting raises alarming questions about whether dissenting voices in media and politics are being silenced at a time when open debate is more vital than ever. Javani and Gunn spoke with True North about the investigation following a panel discussion Thursday evening with Conservative Ajax candidate and radio host Greg Brady at 99 King in Bowmansville. The panel discussion primarily focused on the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which happened the day before, and the importance of independent and alternative media. The Elections Commissioner informed Bexte that he was under criminal investigation for a potential breach of Section 91 of the Canada Election Act for his reporting on allegations sources made against the Liberal candidate for Calgary Federation, Thomas Keeper. The section makes it a criminal offense to knowingly publish false information about a candidate during an election with the intent to sway the election. Juno News and Bexty have denied this allegation, standing by their report. If found guilty of breaching the act, Bexty could face a fine of up to $50,000 and up to 5 years imprisonment. Giovanni told True North, quote, "I worry that other journalists, other young people are going to see stuff like that and then now feel constrained by how they do their jobs. At the end of the day, like, the common thread between that example or what happened with Charlie Kirk is this idea of like, are people free to have a different point of view, or are institutions feeling like entitled to crack down on them and try to stifle the ability to articulate different ideas?" So Walid, how did Aaron Gunn react to this? How did he say the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the investigation into Juno News were related?
Well, the investigation has drawn attention from different groups across the spectrum, but on the Conservative side, not only has Aaron Gunn and Jabil Jawani spoke about it, but even a former True North independent journalist, Andrew Lawton, posted on X that, contrary to Liberal best efforts, independent journalism is not a crime. He further on in his X statement saying that it's ridiculous that a prosecutor body is pursuing Juno News and Kane Bexty over a story that was sourced and corroborated and was taken seriously enough by the Liberals to turf the candidate it was about. Of course, this was referring to Thomas Keeper. Christine Van Gain, the litigation director at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, expressed her disturbance on X regarding the investigation into Bexty's report. She characterized the investigation as, quote, weaponizing the law to stop journalism that the government doesn't like. The CCF, her group, was actually part of the legal challenge against Section 91(1), which led to the Ontario court declaring the section unconstitutional. Of course, the Independent Press Gallery, of which True journalists are registered members, also defended Bexty's reporting, stating the investigation amounted to censorship by prosecution.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.